Okay, so let's examine what we have now here in the browser and see what our first step's going to actually be. So if we open up this index.html in the browser, you're going to see something that looks like this. We have our filters there on the side, but we have no data. So when we talked about having to identify our first behavior, what do you think it's going to be in this case? Well, it's going to actually be requesting the data and then formatting it for our users to view in that listing of apartments. So how are we going to do this? So when we're talking about exchanging data with the server in the world of the front end here, what you're going to always want to think about in this kind of scenario is what's called AJAX. So AJAX allows web pages like ours here to be updated asynchronously. That means it's going to exchange small amounts of data and update it appropriately. So in our case, that means if anything on the server were to change, that AJAX would allow our page to reflect that without having to reload the entire page. So in more classic web applications, anytime the content changed, the whole entire page had to be reloaded in order to reflect that content change. So AJAX makes the art of exchanging data so much more seamless and modern. And so in the world of the front end, where a lot of what we want to do is actually request data in order to display it for the user and create dynamic pages that do not have to be refreshed every time something's updated and is always going to reflect what's accurate in the database, we want to use a utility function that jQuery provides us. This is a very common thing to do in jQuery, is working to request data from a database. And so we can actually go look up the utility function necessary to work with AJAX. So back to the documentation that we know and love so much at this point. Let's go ahead and hop in there. And the first thing listed on the left here, because it's alphabetical and because it's so important, is AJAX. So jQuery gives us a lot of ways to interact with AJAX. You can see a lot of the methods listed here, but ultimately it says the functions and methods therein allow us to load data from the server without a browser page refresh. And that's what we want to do. We want to load the data from the server. And if that data were to change, we want our front-end view that we set up for the user to be able to reflect that change. So there are a lot of methods to interact with AJAX here, but what we're going to use in this case is just this basic AJAX function. So what it says here is that this AJAX method is going to basically perform an asynchronous HTTP request. And an HTTP request is just a way to get information from the server or set information to update the server. So don't get hung up on that. You see HTTP every time you actually write a URL in the browser because you're requesting that page to load. So that's how we actually want to load our data. We just want to make an HTTP request to this site here that we looked at earlier with our data, and then render that data appropriately. So let's go ahead and look at the example.